In the weeks following Carlo Gambino's death, the family he had built faced a crisis that would ultimately tear it apart. Carlo had chosen Paul Castellano to succeed him. It was a decision that shocked many within the organization and planted the seeds for a bloody betrayal that would play out on the streets of Manhattan 9 years later. This is the story of what happened after Carlo Gambino. It is a story of ambition and treachery, of loyalty betrayed and power seized. It is a story that would end with bodies on the sidewalk, informants on the witness stand, and the most powerful crime family in America in ruins. This is Blood and Betrayal. To understand why Carlo Gambino's succession plan failed so catastrophically, we need to understand the two men who would compete for control of his empire. Paul Castellano was born on June 26, 1915 in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. His parents were immigrants from Sicily. His father was a butcher, and young Paul learned the trade, leaving school after the 8th grade to work in the family business. Paul and Carlo Gambino were more than associates. They were family. Paul's sister Catherine had married Carlo in 1926, making them brothers-in-law, and Paul himself was Carlo's cousin. This web of blood ties would prove decisive when Carlo chose his successor. By the 1970s, Paul Castellano had risen to become one of the most powerful figures in the Gambino organization. He was not a traditional street gangster. He preferred business suits to leather jackets. He cultivated relationships with politicians and legitimate businessmen. He lived in a massive mansion on Staten Island that employees jokingly called the White House. Castellano controlled lucrative rackets in the meat industry and construction. Through the Teamsters Union Local 282, the Gambino family had a stranglehold on concrete delivery in New York City. Nothing got built without their permission. Nothing moved without their cut. But there was another power center in the Gambino family. Agnello Della Croce, the underboss, represented the old ways. He was a traditional mobster who had earned his position through decades of service. He controlled the street-level operations, the gambling, the loan sharking, the activities that required violence and intimidation. Della Croce's protege was a young captain from Queens named John Gotti. John Joseph Gotti was born on October 27, 1940, in the South Bronx. He was the fifth of 13 children born to John and Fanny Gotti, both children of Italian immigrants. Unlike Castellano, who came from relative comfort, Gotti grew up in poverty. His father worked as a day laborer when he could find work at all. By the time he was 12 years old, John Gotti was already running errands for local mobsters. By his teens, he led a street gang that specialized in robbery and car theft. His path was set early, and he never looked back. Gotti was everything Castellano was not. Where Castellano was reserved and businesslike, Gotti was loud and aggressive. Where Castellano avoided attention, Gotti seemed to crave it. He wore expensive suits and held court in social clubs. He reveled in his reputation. Under Della Croce's mentorship, Gotti rose quickly through the ranks. He became a captain, leading his own crew of earners and enforcers out of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park, Queens. His men were loyal and they were profitable. The Bergen crew, as it became known, was involved in hijacking, gambling, loan sharking, and eventually drug trafficking. Gotti demanded absolute loyalty from his men, and he received it. They saw him as a leader who would protect them, who would stand up for them against anyone, even the boss himself if necessary. Gotti also had a personal tragedy that shaped his reputation. In March 1980, his 12-year-old son, Frank, was killed in a traffic accident. The boy was riding a motorized minibike when he was struck by a car driven by a neighbor named John Favara. The death was ruled accidental, but 4 months later, John Favara disappeared. His body was never found. He was declared legally dead in 1983. No one was ever charged in connection with his disappearance, but the message to the neighborhood was clear. John Gotti was not a man to cross. When Carlo Gambino died in October 1976, the question of succession immediately became critical. The obvious choice to many was Della Croce. He was the underboss. He had decades of experience. He commanded respect from the street soldiers who formed the backbone of the organization. But Carlo had other plans. From his deathbed, Carlo Gambino designated Paul Castellano as his successor. The decision stunned the organization, but Carlo apparently believed that the family's future lay in white-collar crime, in legitimate-appearing businesses, in the kind of sophisticated operations that Castellano excelled at. There was immediate tension. Many of the street soldiers' men who had earned their positions through violence and loyalty to the old ways resented being passed over in favor of what they saw as a businessman who had never gotten his hands dirty. To maintain peace, a compromise was reached. Castellano would be the boss, but Della Croce would remain as underboss with significant autonomy. The family would effectively be split into two factions. Castellano would control the white-collar operations. Della Croce would oversee the traditional rackets. It was an arrangement that satisfied no one completely, and it contained within it the seeds of disaster. For the next 9 years, Paul Castellano ruled the Gambino family from his Staten Island mansion. He rarely ventured into the neighborhoods where his soldiers operated. He held meetings in his kitchen, which the FBI eventually managed to bug, capturing hours of incriminating conversations. The mansion itself became a symbol of everything that alienated Castellano from the street soldiers. It sat on a hill overlooking the water, a 17-room palace that cost millions to build. Castellano filled it with expensive furniture, original artwork, and all the trappings of legitimate wealth. His men joked that visiting the boss was like going to see the Pope. While Castellano lived in splendor, many of his captains and soldiers struggled. The money was not flowing down to them the way it had under Carlo. Castellano was perceived as greedy, taking too large a share and giving back too little. He surrounded himself with a small circle of trusted associates and kept everyone else at arm's length. There were also whispers about his personal life. FBI surveillance would later reveal that Castellano was having an affair with his Colombian maid, Gloria Olarte. The relationship was an open secret within the family, another source of disrespect among traditionalists who believed a boss should maintain certain standards. Castellano was reportedly earning millions of dollars a year. The family's construction rackets alone generated enormous profits. But he was also facing increasing pressure from law enforcement. The FBI had made the Gambino family a priority target. And there was another problem: drugs. Castellano had supposedly banned members of the family from dealing narcotics. The penalties for drug trafficking had become severe, and Castellano feared that arrested dealers might cooperate with the government to avoid long sentences. The rule was simple and absolute. Anyone caught dealing drugs faced death. But the rule was widely ignored. John Gotti's closest friend and associate, Angelo Ruggiero, was dealing heroin. So was Gotti's brother Gene. In August 1983, both men were arrested for drug trafficking. The case was built largely on recordings from electronic surveillance devices that the FBI had planted in Ruggiero's home. Castellano demanded to hear the tapes. He wanted to know exactly what had been said and who had been implicated. But Ruggiero refused to hand them over. The tapes contained not only evidence of drug dealing, but also disparaging comments about Castellano himself. Della Croce, caught in the middle, tried to mediate. He stalled, promising Castellano he would get the tapes while protecting his protege Gotti. But as Della Croce's health declined, his ability to keep the peace declined with it. In March 1984, Paul Castellano was indicted on federal racketeering charges. The case included allegations of extortion, drug trafficking, and murder. He was released on $2 million bail, but the walls were closing in. Then came the Mafia Commission trial. In February 1985, Castellano was arrested again, this time as part of a massive federal prosecution targeting the bosses of all 5 New York crime families. The indictment charged them with operating a commission that governed organized crime in New York City. It was the most ambitious prosecution of the Mafia in American history. Castellano was now facing the very real possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. And within his own family, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. On December 2nd, 1985, Aniello Della Croce finally succumbed to the cancer that had been destroying him. He died at 69 years old, having served the Gambino family for more than 4 decades. His death removed the last buffer between Castellano and his enemies. Castellano did not attend Della Croce's wake. He cited his legal troubles and his desire to avoid attracting FBI attention. But to men like John Gotti, who had loved Della Croce like a father, this was an unforgivable insult. To make matters worse, Castellano moved quickly to reshape the family's leadership. He appointed his bodyguard and driver, Thomas Bellotti, as the new underboss. It was a shocking choice. Bellotti was loyal to Castellano, but lacked the respect of the broader organization. He He had few allies among the captains and soldiers who would now be expected to answer to him. There were also rumors that Castellano planned to break up Gotti's crew, distributing his men among other captains. For Gotti, this was an existential threat. The decision to kill Paul Castellano was made in the days following Della Croce's death. John Gotti assembled a small group of conspirators. Frank DeCicco, a captain who had been close to Castellano but saw which way the wind was blowing. Salvatore Gravano, known as Sammy the Bull, a rising figure in the family. Joseph Armani, an old-timer whose support would lend legitimacy to the plot. What they were planning violated one of the most fundamental rules of the American Mafia. Killing a boss without the approval of the commission was forbidden. It was a capital offense, but Gotti calculated that the other bosses would not move against him if he succeeded. Castellano had few friends on the commission, and after the Mafia commission trial, several of those bosses would soon be in prison anyway. Frank DeCicco provided the crucial piece of intelligence. He learned that Castellano was scheduled to attend a meeting at Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan on December 16, 1985. The meeting was supposedly to smooth over tensions within the family following Della Croce's death. It was a trap. December 16, 1985 was a cold Monday evening in Manhattan. Christmas lights decorated the storefronts. Shoppers hurried through the streets, their arms full of packages. The holiday season was in full swing. The conspirators had chosen this setting deliberately. In the crush of holiday shoppers, in the chaos of rush hour traffic, the hit would take only seconds, and the killers could disappear into the crowds before anyone understood what had happened. Sammy Gravano would later describe the planning. The hit team consisted of 11 men in total, 4 shooters, several backup gunmen, and the getaway drivers. They were all Gambino members, most of them made men who understood that what they were doing would change everything. The shooters wore identical outfits, long beige trench coats, black Russian-style fur hats. The look was almost theatrical, like something out of a movie, but it served a purpose. Witnesses would remember the costumes, not the faces beneath them. The men would blend into the crowd of businessmen heading home for the evening. At approximately 5:16 in the evening, a black Lincoln Town Car pulled up in front of Sparks Steakhouse at 210 East 46th Street. Paul Castellano sat in the passenger seat. His driver and newly appointed underboss, Thomas Bellotti, was behind the wheel. Waiting near the entrance were 4 men in long beige trench coats and black Russian-style fur hats. The identical outfits were deliberate. Witnesses would remember the clothes, not the faces. As Castellano stepped out of the car, the gunmen moved with military precision. They opened fire at close range. Castellano was hit 6 times and collapsed onto the sidewalk beside a lamppost. He was dead before he hit the ground. Bellotti, still inside the car, scrambled to respond. He opened his door and tried to exit, but another gunman approached from behind and shot him in the back of the head. He fell onto the street just feet from his boss. The entire attack took less than 30 seconds. The gunman walked calmly away, disappearing into the crowds of holiday shoppers who were now screaming and running for cover. Within moments, they had vanished into the Manhattan evening. Parked nearby in a Lincoln with tinted windows, John Gotti and Sammy Gravano watched the execution unfold. When it was over, Gotti slowly drove past the bodies, confirming that both men were dead. Then he turned south onto 2nd Avenue and headed back to Brooklyn. The assassination of Paul Castellano was the most brazen mob hit in New York since Albert Anastasia had been gunned down in a barbershop nearly 30 years earlier. It made headlines around the world, and it announced to everyone inside and outside the underworld that John Gotti was now in charge. The bodies of Castellano and Bellotti lay on the sidewalk outside Sparks Steakhouse as police arrived. Photographers captured the scene, blood pooling around the corpses as Christmas shoppers looked on in horror. The images would appear on front pages around the world. Inside the restaurant, the men who had been waiting to meet Castellano sat in stunned silence. Among them was Frank DeCicco, who had helped plan the very murder that had just taken place. He would later emerge to express shock and outrage, playing his role perfectly. The police launched an immediate investigation, but they faced a familiar problem. No one had seen anything. No one would talk. The code of silence held at least for now. 2 weeks after the murders, Gotti was formally elected boss of the Gambino family. He appointed Frank DeCicco as his underboss and began restructuring the organization. But Gotti had made powerful enemies. Vincent Gigante, the boss of the Genovese family, was furious. Gigante had been close to Castellano. They had done business together for years. More importantly, Gotti had violated the fundamental rules of the Mafia. He had killed a boss without commission approval. In Gigante's view, such an act could not go unpunished. Gigante reached out to Anthony Carallo, the boss of the Lucchese family, to plan retaliation. They would kill John Gotti and restore order to the underworld. On April 13, 1986, less than 4 months after the Castellano hit, the revenge came. Frank DeCicco had attended a meeting at the Veterans and Friends Social Club in the Diker Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn. John Gotti was supposed to be there as well, but he had changed his plans at the last minute. As DeCicco approached his Buick sedan, accompanied by a Lucchese soldier named Frank Bellino, a bomb exploded beneath the car. The device had been planted by Herbert Pate, a Genovese associate with expertise in explosives. Pate had mistaken Bellino, who bore a resemblance to Gotti, for the intended target. The explosion killed DeCicco instantly. Sammy Gravano, who arrived at the scene moments later, would later describe what he found in horrific detail. The blast had torn DeCicco's body apart. His legs were severed. His internal organs were exposed. There was almost no blood left in him. Bellino survived, but was seriously injured. The use of a bomb was significant. Car bombs had been outlawed by the American Mafia for decades because they put innocent bystanders at risk. But the Genovese and Lucchese families used one deliberately, hoping to make the Gambinos think the attack came from Sicilian mafiosi who were known to use explosives. John Gotti was reportedly enraged. He understood immediately that he had been the target and that other bosses were moving against him. According to later testimony, he swore that when his legal troubles were resolved, there would be war. But first, Gotti had to survive the government. Throughout the late 1980s, John Gotti seemed untouchable. The press dubbed him the Teflon Don because criminal charges simply would not stick to him. He became a celebrity, perhaps the most famous gangster since Al Capone. Gotti cultivated his image carefully. He appeared in public wearing hand-tailored Brioni suits that cost thousands of dollars. His hair was always perfectly styled. He held fireworks displays in his Queens neighborhood on the 4th of July, handing out food and drinks to his admiring neighbors. He was to many a modern Robin Hood figure, a man who had made good and shared his success with his community. The media loved him. Gotti gave good quotes. He posed for photographs. He played to the cameras with the skill of a Hollywood actor. The tabloids could not get enough of him. But behind the celebrity image, Gotti was running a criminal enterprise that dealt in violence and intimidation. He demanded absolute loyalty and punished any perceived slight with death. According to FBI recordings, he ordered multiple murders during his time as boss, sometimes for offenses as minor as failing to appear when summoned. His headquarters was the Ravenite Social Club on Mulberry Street in Little Italy. He required all his captains to report there weekly, a decision that many considered reckless. It made surveillance easy for the FBI, but Gotti believed he was untouchable. In 1986, Gotti was tried on racketeering charges. He was acquitted after the jury foreman was later found to have accepted a $60,000 bribe. In 1987, Gotti was tried for assault. The victim, who had initially reported being robbed, suddenly claimed he could not remember anything. The charges were dropped. In 1990, Gotti was tried for ordering the shooting of a union official. Again, he was acquitted. With each acquittal, Gotti's celebrity grew. He held court at the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy, surrounded by admirers and sycophants. He posed for photographs with fans. He gave quotes to reporters. He became in many ways the most famous gangster since Al Capone. But Gotti's arrogance would prove to be his undoing. The FBI never stopped watching. They planted listening devices in the Ravenite and recorded thousands of hours of conversations. They tracked Gotti's movements and documented his meetings. And they cultivated informants within the Gambino family itself. The most important of these informants would turn out to be the man closest to Gotti himself. Salvatore Gravano had risen through the ranks alongside Gotti. He had helped plan and execute the Castellano hit. After DeCicco's death, he had become underboss, the second most powerful position in the family. He was Gotti's most trusted advisor. But the FBI recordings captured something that would change everything. On tape, Gotti could be heard disparaging Gravano, blaming him for problems, suggesting that Gravano might be sacrificed to protect the boss. The relationship between the two men, built on years of shared crimes, began to crack. In December 1990, the FBI arrested John Gotti at the Ravenite Social Club. He was charged with multiple counts of racketeering, including the murders of Paul Castellano and Thomas Bellotti. This time, the government was taking no chances. Gotti was denied bail. And then came the blow that would finally bring down the Teflon Don. In November 1991, Salvatore Gravano made the decision that would seal Gotti's fate. He agreed to cooperate with the federal government. Gravano had been arrested alongside Gotti. He was facing life in prison, and he had heard the tapes where Gotti disparaged him. When prosecutors approached him with a deal, he listened. What Gravano offered was unprecedented. He was the highest-ranking member of the American Mafia ever to become a government witness. He knew everything. He had participated in 19 murders. He could testify to the inner workings of the Gambino family from personal experience. Gravano's reasons for cooperating were complex. He was facing life in prison. He had heard the tapes where Gotti disparaged him, calling him names and suggesting he might be sacrificed. But there may have been something more. Gravano would later say that he had grown disillusioned with what the Mafia had become, that men like Gotti had corrupted the old values of honor and loyalty. Whatever his motivations, Gravano's decision to cooperate sent shockwaves through the underworld. If the underboss of the Gambino family would talk, no one was safe. The code of silence that had protected the Mafia for generations was revealed to be a myth. In exchange for his cooperation, Gravano would receive a reduced sentence. He would also be entered into the Federal Witness Protection Program. He would serve just 5 years in prison for his role in 19 murders. The deal was controversial. Many felt that Gravano was getting away with murder literally, but prosecutors argued that his testimony was essential to bringing down the entire Gambino hierarchy. The omerta, the code of silence that had protected the Mafia for generations, had been broken at the highest level. The trial of John Gotti began in January 1992 and became a media sensation. The Dapper Don, as Gotti was also known, sat in the courtroom in his tailored suits, maintaining what one observer called a fixed smile as the evidence mounted against him. The government's case was built on 3 pillars. First, the FBI recordings, which captured Gotti discussing murders, extortion, and other crimes in his own voice. Second, documentary evidence of the Gambino family's criminal enterprises. And third, the testimony of Salvatore Gravano. When Gravano took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Here was the underboss of the Gambino family, a man who had stood beside Gotti for years, describing in detail how the organization operated and the crimes its leader had ordered. Gravano testified that he had personally witnessed the aftermath of the Castellano murder. He described sitting in the car with Gotti as the boss slowly drove past the bodies to confirm the targets were dead. Gotti's attorneys attacked Gravano's credibility. They pointed out that he was a self-confessed murderer who was testifying to save himself. But the tapes corroborated much of what Gravano said, and his detailed knowledge of the family's operations was impossible to dismiss. On April 2, 1992, after only 14 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict, guilty on all counts. At a press conference following the verdict, James Fox, the assistant director of the FBI's New York field office, announced, "The Teflon is gone. The Don is covered with Velcro and all the charges stuck." On June 23, 1992, John Gotti was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was transferred to the United States Penitentiary at Marion, Illinois, where he would spend the rest of his days in virtual solitary confinement, allowed out of his cell for only 1 hour per day. The prison at Marion was designed for the most dangerous criminals in the federal system. Gotti was kept in a small cell for 23 hours a day. His contact with the outside world was severely limited. The man who had once held court surrounded by admirers now sat alone in a concrete box. But even from prison, Gotti attempted to maintain control of the Gambino family. He appointed his son, John Jr., as acting boss. He sent messages through his lawyers and through the few visitors he was permitted. He believed that when he finally won his appeals, he would return to reclaim his throne. The appeals never came through. The fall of John Gotti devastated the Gambino family. Gotti's son, John Jr., attempted to take control, but he lacked his father's charisma and criminal cunning. Federal prosecutions continued to pick off members at every level of the organization. Gotti himself remained defiant to the end. He refused to show any remorse for his crimes. He maintained that he was a legitimate businessman who had been persecuted by the government. In 1998, Gotti was diagnosed with throat cancer. The disease progressed rapidly, and despite treatment, it could not be stopped. On June 10, 2002, John Gotti died at the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. He was 61 years old. The cancer had spread through his body, leaving him a shell of the man who had once strutted through the streets of New York. In his final days, he was barely able to speak. The swagger, the tailored suits, the million-dollar smile, all of it was gone. His funeral in Queens drew thousands of mourners. The procession of limousines and flower cars stretched for blocks. His coffin was carried through the streets of the neighborhood where he had once ruled. Admirers lined the sidewalks, some weeping, others cheering as if at a parade. The media covered it all. It was the end of an era, they said, the last of the celebrity gangsters. But the era he represented was already over. The Gambino crime family that Carlo Gambino had built, that Paul Castellano had tried to transform, that John Gotti had seized through murder, was a shadow of its former self. Federal prosecutions under the RICO statute had imprisoned or killed most of its leadership. The old codes of silence had been shattered by informants like Gravano, who proved that even the highest-ranking mobsters would talk when facing life in prison. In the years since Gotti's death, the Gambino family has continued to operate, but with greatly diminished power and influence. Other criminal organizations have moved into the spaces it once controlled. The old Italian-American monopoly on organized crime in New York has been broken. In 2019, Frank Cali, who had become boss of the Gambino family, was shot to death outside his home on Staten Island. It was the first assassination of a New York mob boss since Paul Castellano more than 30 years earlier, but the murder made far fewer headlines than Castellano's had. The world had moved on. Looking back at the history of the Gambino family after Carlo, it is impossible not to see a story of decline. Carlo Gambino had built an organization that generated hundreds of millions of dollars and operated largely in the shadows. His successors brought it into the light and destroyed it. Paul Castellano's arrogance and isolation alienated the very men whose loyalty he needed. John Gotti's flamboyance attracted the sustained attention of law enforcement that ultimately brought him down. Sammy Gravano's betrayal demonstrated that the code of silence was a myth that could not survive the pressure of a federal prosecution. But the story of the Gambino family is not just a story of criminals, it is also a story of victims. Throughout the decades covered in this documentary, countless people were harmed by organized crime, workers whose unions were corrupted and controlled, businesses that were extorted, families destroyed by drugs that mobsters sold while their bosses publicly banned the trade, and innocent people who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Paul Castellano and Thomas Bellotti were killed on a busy Manhattan street during the Christmas shopping season. Bystanders ran screaming as gunfire erupted around them. The trauma of witnessing such violence does not disappear. Frank DeCicco was killed by a car bomb, a weapon so indiscriminate that it had been banned by the Mafia itself. An innocent bystander was seriously injured in the blast. These were not victimless crimes. They never are. The men who led the Gambino family, Carlo Gambino, Paul Castellano, John Gotti, each died in different ways. Carlo passed peacefully in his sleep. Castellano was gunned down on a public street. Gotti wasted away in a prison hospital. But in one sense, they all shared the same fate. The empire they built, the power they wielded, the wealth they accumulated, all of it proved to be temporary. The family that Carlo Gambino spent 50 years constructing was dismantled in less than 2 decades after his death. What remains now is history, a cautionary tale about the nature of criminal enterprise, the limits of loyalty, and the inevitable consequences of choosing a life of violence. Carlo Gambino once said that a man who is careful can accomplish anything. He was careful. He died in his bed, but the men who came after him were not so careful, and they paid the price. The story of the Gambino family is, in the end, a story about how empires fall, built on blood maintained through fear, and ultimately destroyed by the very forces that created them. Carlo Gambino understood something that his successors did not. Power in the underworld depends on invisibility. The most successful criminal is the one no one knows about. Carlo lived in a modest house. He avoided publicity. He conducted business in whispers and gestures. Paul Castellano forgot this lesson. He built a palace that announced his wealth to the world. He isolated himself from the men who could have protected him. He believed that money and legitimate-appearing businesses would insulate him from the violence of the streets. John Gotti ignored the lesson entirely. He courted publicity. He posed for cameras. He held court like a medieval king, demanding that his subjects come to him. Every appearance, every quote, every tailored suit made him a bigger target for law enforcement. And in the end, his own vanity put him behind bars. The Gambino family today is a shadow of what it once was. Federal prosecutions have imprisoned generation after generation of its leadership. The old neighborhoods where mobsters once held sway have gentrified beyond recognition. The children and grandchildren of made men have moved into legitimate businesses, leaving the underworld behind. But organized crime has not disappeared. It has evolved. New groups have moved into the spaces the Italian-American Mafia once controlled. Drug cartels, street gangs, cyber criminals operating from overseas. The names and faces change, but the fundamental dynamics of criminal enterprise remain. The quiet Don is gone. His successors are dead or in prison, and the streets where they once ruled belong now to others. This concludes our two-part documentary on Carlo Gambino and the Gambino crime family. Thank you for watching.